So yeah, obviously I'm Elisha KIRKHAM. I'm the recruitment manager here at Softcat. Most people call me Leash though. Elisha feels really, really formal. So I've been at Softcat for 10 years this year. So I've done a real shift, even though it doesn't actually feel like it, to be fair. And I know it sounds super cheesy, but genuinely I've been here 10 years and I have loved every one of them years, and genuinely to this day still absolutely buzz off coming into this office every day and working with the teams I get to work with. So really positive experience with Softcat over the last decade or so. My career journey has been like a little bit of an unusual one in terms of where I started and where I am now. So just to give you a little bit around that, I finished university in 2012. Again, mental that's like 12 years ago. I don't know where that time's gone. But I finished university in 2012 and had gone to university to do English thinking that I was going to be a teacher. And I was that typical stereotype that I'd just kind of put myself in that box. I'm going to be a teacher, and that's where this is going to go. I'm going to convert off the back of my degree. I'm going to do a PGCE, and then I'm going to go and teach. And then I did some classroom experience quite early on in my degree and very quickly realised that was not for me. Knew that there was elements of it that absolutely resonated with me and that I enjoyed, namely the development and seeing the impact you could have with people and enabling learning and that kind of stuff. So that all very much resonated with me. But I have friends who are teachers, and because of that, know that it absolutely was not the career choice for me. I knew that I wanted that good stuff like the enablement and supporting and developing people, but I'm also very commercially minded, and have always been incredibly ambitious, and a big part of that for me is financially motivated. So I knew that longer term, I think you have to be quite selfless to go into education, and I think it's probably not the right thing to say I'm a bit selfish, but I definitely am a bit selfish. And I was thinking more about what do I want from my career, and that was, as well as that good stuff, it was a long-term development for myself and also financial incentive, and I wanted to be in more of a corporate environment. So off the back of uni, I came away from university kind of a little bit lost, not really knowing where I was going to go with that, now that teaching was no longer a thing for me, and it felt like I was starting from the ground up again. So I thought I'll take a year out, get a job that'll just kind of sustain me in the meantime, do a bit of soul searching and figure out what that looks like for me moving forward. And I applied for a million jobs and don't even remember applying for Softcat. But I got a call from one of the girls that actually still works on my team to this day, and called me and said I'd applied for a job at Softcat, and she wanted to interview me. So had an interview for the Manchester office receptionist role. And then that progressed really quickly. Within a couple of days, they had me in the office. I met with two of our sales managers and our director in the Manchester office at the time. And then the next day got offered the role and then started the Monday the following week. So it all happened very, very quickly. Started on reception in the Manchester office in August 2014. Funnily enough, the people who interviewed me still work here now. And one of them has told me frequently that he was the only one of the three that actively didn't want to hire me. Wow. And when I've asked why, his answer was, because I knew you wouldn't last. I knew you'd do the job for a few months and you would want to do something else. You would, as soon as you had a foot in the door, you'd be looking around, you seeing all this great stuff that was happening, and you would want to do more. And he was right. I was in the door and immediately taken by the culture, immediately just enthralled by the people focus and the connection and the real kind of cohesion across such a large office and such a large organization, but this real feeling of, again, it sounds quite cheesy, but this real feeling of a common goal was very obvious to me from day one. And that kind of got me caught up in the Softcat bubble. So from there, I was immediately looking around me and going, what do I want to do? I want to stay here. What is of interest? And at the time, we had zero HR presence in any office outside of our Marlow head office. All of our non-sales functions back then were centralised in the Marlow office. And we were, when I first started, just on the cusp of taking some of those functions into other offices. So it was in the very early stages of taking those purely sales satellite offices and making them broader in the functions that they housed. So we had a recruitment presence in Marlow, but they came up to Manchester every 2 weeks to run assessment centres. So I got quite pally with those girls and the HR team, and quite quickly was like, this is something I could do. I could really enjoy this, and very much identified that it aligned with my skill set and the things I enjoyed doing. So Softcat's always been really great at taking punts on people. And again, probably not the right thing to say when it comes to an organization this size, but I think we are really great at spotting potential and having the courage to kind of dive all in on that, even if potentially the evidence wasn't there historically to lend itself to that they would definitely be able to do this. And that's what they did with me. I had zero recruitment experience, but I think because I was so engaged and so excited about an opportunity within that space, and obviously had built connections internally with the 6 months I'd been here, they decided to sort of give me an opportunity and see how that went. And safe to say it went really well. So I started in an internal recruiter position in the Manchester office. That was probably the January of 2015. And as I said, the only member of the HR team based in any office outside of Marlow. And then very quickly from there, we started to, it kind of escalated quite quickly in the years following. So a couple of years later, I got an apprentice to manage from a day-to-day management point of view. So that was kind of my first step into management within Softcat, although I'd managed previously. And then from there onwards, I became a team leader and then grew out the team in the Manchester office. And then 12 months ago or last year, was promoted into the recruitment management role. So that's what my journey has looked like in a bit of a nutshell. And in terms of kind of where the recruitment team stands right now, we have gone from, when I started, we were a team of 5, and now we're at 21, I think, across Manchester, Marlow and Birmingham. So we have a really strong presence in multiple offices now, and sit within a wider HR department of nearly 50 people, which was when I started, I think the HR department as a whole was like 10. So we've grown massively. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be a part of that over the last decade. So that's 100%. A little bit about my journey.
That's really useful. Do you remember what the revenue was when you joined Softcat?
Oh my God, it was something crazy. Like,
because I know that then kind of Martin Helliwell years, there was a massive trajectory.
Oh my God, yeah,
when
last 10 years. Because I
just checked when we were speaking. Yeah, it's 2.56 billion now, which just feels absolutely insane. But it couldn't have been more than 100 million maybe when you joined, or something like that, maybe even less.
I think it was probably less, to be fair. It has gone, literally, Martin coming in was the turning point, and that gets talked about so often, right? And I think there's absolutely something to be said for the fact that you have, like, as with anything, CEOs and chief execs are seasonal for where the business is at that point and what the business needs, right? And Martin was what we absolutely needed to take Softcat from what it was to what it was going to be. And then obviously it's the same for Graham Watt. He was then needed at that stage to elevate it further and take it to the next level. So we've been really, really lucky with the chief execs that we've had in the chair, and them being able to come in and deliver what the business needed at that point and take it to the next level. And then obviously now we've got GC, Graham Charlton, who stepped in last year and I think is absolutely the right person for the job moving forward to elevate Softcat even further. So yeah, from a revenue point of view, you're really testing me, but the long and short of it is it's gone like this in the 10 years I've been here.
Find it.
You'll be able to dig it out somewhere.
100%. I'm really intrigued. So that's a really good kind of headline. You've been on that journey and must have seen so many changes internally, particularly from the stuff we're going to speak at now. So I'll definitely check that out. I think the glaring obviously I really want to speak about is the award you won last year. So winning CRN Outstanding Returner of 2023. Was that the first year that award's been?
No, I think it's been going for a while now, because I know a few.
Oh, really?
I know we've had a few people go for it in previous years. So I think it's a long-standing award, and I knew. So I came back from maternity leave, and I flagged to my management team that it was something I wanted to go for. And this is something I want to talk about at some point as well. That I have had a lot of people come to me and have conversations with me around how have you achieved? How did you go about achieving what you've achieved since you returned from maternity leave? And has it been luck? Has it been the right people around you? What has it been? And my answer is the same every time. I asked for everything I got. Everything I've got, I asked for. I asked to be nominated for CRO and Outstanding Returner of the Year because I genuinely believed I deserved it. And I asked to be put on our leadership development program because I genuinely believed I warranted a place. And I think you don't, and it's such a cliche, but there's an argument for, there are so many people out there who are unsung heroes, who work their arses off and work so hard, but arguably never get recognised to the degree they should. And I think the differentiator is building those people, building the confidence in those people to be able to ask for what they want, because I'm a massive believer in you don't get if you don't ask. And you cannot, we're the center of our own world, right? We are us. So we think that everybody else is thinking about us in the same way, to the same degree that we're thinking about ourselves, but they're not. Everybody's thinking about themselves. Everybody's caught up in their own world. So unless you back yourself enough to go, I deserve this, I'm going to put myself on people's radar and say, I want to go for this, I want to be recognized in this way, then the likelihood of it happening organically is much slimmer. So I think there's a piece there around backing yourself, identifying what you want and going after it very intentionally and very proactively. And I think the only way we're going to get people to get to that place is to build people's confidence to be able to do that. And again, that goes back to the effective leadership piece as well.
100%. And I think there's two avenues of thought I have there. My first is a recruiter. The amount of calls we get where someone's feeling bitter that they haven't had the recognition they deserve, or they haven't had that piece of progression they were expecting. But when you ask, have you ever had a conversation with your manager? Have you ever kind of highlighted this? The majority haven't and feel like it should come to them. And as a byproduct of what you just said, in terms of everyone's kind of thinking at themselves and like you're in your own world all the time, your manager's no different and the people around you aren't in a different spot. So that's a point that's often missed. But kind of second to that is actually having a business place that enable that type of behaviour, and you don't get put down for being overconfident or stepping over your marks. I think that's really powerful that you felt like you had that platform, and also kind of other people in Softcat have got that. So that's really, really good. Obviously, leavers could come under a lot of different reasons. It could be kind of maternity leave, it could be for perhaps mental health issues or injuries or a whole other host of things. But obviously yours was maternity leave, and I think this is an area of the channel in particular I don't think it's highlighted enough. For me, for example, I have absolutely no idea what that experience is like, and kind of coming back to work must be really daunting when I kind of practically think about it. But when you're not practically thinking about it, you just think, oh, they're back and they'll be absolutely fine. But would you mind just talking through your experience of having that time off and kind of coming back into the office and kind of what happened there? Because I think there's so many people that have got to either prepare for that or be educated on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most important thing to start with is everybody's experience is individual to them. So everybody will, every returner, no matter your reasons, so that can span across all genders. But if we're talking specifically about maternity leave and returning from having a baby, every woman will experience that differently. And I think that is the first thing that as managers or as people supporting those returners, we need to be communicating that there is no right or wrong. Whether so many women go in, have a baby and want to disconnect from everything and just want to have that 12 months, 9 months, whatever they take, focused on this new part of their life and giving their all to this, and don't want to be thinking about work and want to compartmentalize in that way, which absolutely works for so many. And then you get another subsection of women who are wanting to balance that and wanting to obviously give focus to this new part of their life, but also want to stay connected to that old piece of them. And that was more where I fell. So throughout the entirety of my maternity leave, don't get me wrong, I wasn't on team meetings or anything like that, but I kept in contact with, by that point I had a team of, I was the team leader for our sales recruitment division. So I had a team of 10 or so. So kept in contact with all of those guys on a relatively regular basis. The girl who covered my maternity leave was one of my team members, and we'd worked together for a long time. So we kept in contact and saw each other regularly. So I kept relatively abreast of what was going on, whilst balancing that with not becoming too caught up in work, whilst I was trying to focus on this new part of my life and becoming a mum. A big piece of this puzzle is I had a pretty significant case of PND or postnatal depression after having my little boy Max. So there was that to combat as well. It wasn't just a case of I'd had a baby, things had gone relatively smoothly. Yes, there was adjustment and life had changed, but I was okay. There was all of that, plus the fact that I was trying to wade my way through these postnatal mental health issues that I didn't really know where to start with. So that was a big piece of it. And I think all of that culminated in, by time it came to me returning back to work, so that was around 11 or 12 months after having Max, I was really excited to get back to a version of the old me. I knew it wasn't going to be exactly how things were, obviously, because my entire life had changed. I was a mum now and things were different, priorities were different. But the idea of getting a bit of me back and having time to have adult conversations and talk about things that weren't related to nappies or feeding or weaning or anything like that, I was really excited for. So I didn't really feel, I don't remember feeling any, if I'm honest, any anxiety about coming back to work, which I am not coming at that in any way naively. I know many women feel anxious about coming back to work for many different reasons. I think a lot of that is usually due to team environments or the support they've had from their manager or lack of support they've had from their manager. And I can say wholeheartedly, I was incredibly lucky in that respect. I had an amazing manager, but generally an amazing support system. And I think a lot of that is probably due to the fact that I'd had such a long career at Softcat by that point, that I had a very strong support network internally, and I had people who had backed me and who had championed me even though I was away, and still saying my name in the right rooms and putting me forward for opportunities when I came back. So I was still feeling supported and encouraged, and it was a really good balance when I returned of take your time, find your feet, but they also knew me well enough to know that I am incredibly ambitious. I'm incredibly driven. I'm always thinking about what's next. So it was take your time and find your feet and don't rush. But when you're ready, there's all of this. And it was kind of making sure I knew that I hadn't been forgotten. There was great opportunity there, because I'll be honest with you, coming back, there wasn't anxiety because I was really looking forward to getting back. But I felt a lot of insecurity whilst I was away, primarily around the fact that unfortunately, the girl who went into my role and covered the maternity leave is incredible at her job. And she still works for me now. She's now one of our team, or one of my team leaders within the team. She manages our early careers recruitment division. Her name's Tia. And Tia is incredible and has always been. She was my first hire into the team when I became team leader years ago, and we have an incredible working relationship, and we are basically one person. So because of that, she went into that role and did a fantastic job from day one. And I was sat at home thinking, I am not needed anymore. I am not needed. Where am I going to add value when I go back? And there was a lot of negative internal narrative that I had to check myself on, very inaccurate internal narrative. But my point of all of this is it brought out a level of insecurity in me that was very unexpected, because prior to all of this, I'd always been very self-assured when it came to my career, very confident, really understood my value, really understood and was able to articulate what I brought to the table. And that year off put me in a headspace of, I felt like I was starting from base again when I returned. There was an element of me thinking, do I need to go and reprove myself? Is that what I need to do? And then thankfully, as soon as I landed back in the business, it became very obvious that wasn't the case, and nobody had forgotten me, and I'd been very much part of the conversation and part of the plans and all of that great stuff. But I think it's very, very easy to underestimate the level of insecurity that being away for a year, you're essentially pressing a pause button on your life for a year, right? That's what being on maternity leave is. Not only have you had this entire life shift and everything has changed and your entire world has turned upside down and you're probably not sleeping and like everything is different. And then on top of that, you're having to navigate this, and I don't want to generalize, some women may not feel this, but in my experience, this level of insecurity around your career as well. And how is this going to impact my career, especially if you are ambitious and you want to continue to drive forward? How is this going to impact that? So there was lots of question marks for me. It was a real uncertain time. But as soon as I landed back in the business, all of those question marks were put to bed very quickly. And I felt very confident, very supported, and can safely say I have had the most successful 2 years of my career since returning back from maternity leave. And a lot of that is due to the support I've had. But I also will wholeheartedly take credit for it myself as well, and say a lot of that is due to the mindset I came back with, that I wasn't going to allow myself to be shut out of those conversations, and I was ready to drive forward, and I wanted more, and I was going to ask for what I wanted. And yeah, I think that is a piece of advice I've given to a lot of women since returning who've been in the same situation.
That's awesome. And in terms of Softcat as a business, because you obviously mentioned that you went back, everyone made you feel welcome, you haven't been forgotten about, and I think Softcat's genuinely just full of really, really good people, and that environment will probably always create itself because they're just good people around. But there are also people that won't be as conscious, that will be twice as busy than they were before, and perhaps wouldn't be as aware of what they should be doing in return. Is there anything that's really actionable for maybe other businesses or other leaders that they could go in and say, right, that person's coming back from extended leave, this is what we need to do, this is what Softcat did well, this is what perhaps we didn't do particularly well that we're working on now? Or is there anything that we could perhaps provide to support other people in making that a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's practicalities that need to be considered, right? I think there are the basics, like having some kind of internal returner buddy system is really important, because as much as a manager, you can be there in every way to listen and support. There's an argument for, if you've not been through it, it's very difficult to empathize and understand on a real level what that person's experiencing. So I think the practicalities of having an internal buddy system, so that every returner coming back into the business has or will be then connected with somebody who has not so long ago, in the way we do it, it's usually within the last couple of years, has gone through the same experience themselves, and can connect in a really authentic way on what that person's going through, and really just validate their experience from a position of actually knowing what that's like. So I think that's important from a practicality perspective. But from a manager point of view, no matter whether you have been through it yourself or not, I think, and this is going to sound like a real cop-out answer because it's very basic, but genuinely, I believe the most important thing any of us can do is truly and actively listen. Make them feel heard, make them feel seen, make them feel like they have a place to talk about whatever they need to talk about, and that, more importantly than anything else, that's not going to impact your perception of them and their ability and what they bring to the table, because that is, again, to generalize, but many women's biggest fear, that if they're struggling off the back of having a baby, or struggling with returning because they're away from their baby for the first time and it's a massive adjustment, that they're then going to be seen as somebody who can't handle those situations, or for some reason is less capable than they were prior to going away. So really just communicating that everything you're going through right now is situational. It in no way impacts my perception of you, your ability, your value. And I just want to hear you and be here to actively listen. Because there's a difference, right? Listening to somebody in a one-to-one and nodding and smiling versus carving out time of your day to specifically go and sit with somebody and go, how are you? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do? Do you have all the support you need? Actively listening to them. And I'm a massive believer in, and I say this to my guys all the time, actively listening to someone isn't just, you're not just listening with your ears. Every part of you is the engagement, the eye contact, the nodding, all of that culminates into an experience that makes somebody feel genuinely seen, heard, and validated, versus a one-to-one and you being like, are you okay? How's the return going? Is everything all right? Like, that's two very different experiences for a returner. So I think that is at the center of the sort of the foundation of a successful return, having a manager who is genuinely focused and committed to making you feel seen and heard in what you're experiencing, and being along with you on that journey, rather than coming at it from an objective perspective and feeling more like an outsider. Because as a returner, a lot of what you're feeling is isolation. You're feeling like you're the one person going through this, and everyone around you is carried on with life as normal for 12 months, and you're having to try and jump back in, feeling like you have your manager along for that ride with you, and they're genuinely a partner with you on that return, can make a real difference. And that's what I had, and I think that's part of why it was such a successful return to the business.
That's absolutely fascinating. A lot of the stuff I hadn't even considered, and you bringing that stuff up is quite scary to think that how much of that is actually happening opposed to what's going to be needed. So it's a really good point to highlight. I think your superpower is vulnerability. We've spoken kind of several times now, and you don't have a filter in terms of what you want to share. You don't have a ability to kind of sit and go, oh, I've got this, but I don't want to share that because I don't want to be looked at in this way. But you're so open, and I think it's such a powerful message to send to the world that everyone's suffering, everyone's got stuff going on, everyone's had kind of trials and tribulations during their journey. Like, let's talk about it. What have you kind of been through, and let's all learn from it. In terms of that kind of vulnerability piece, like, how do you think that's enabled you as a leader yourself? And what would you kind of recommend in terms of people that maybe aren't as vulnerable, or people that don't share as much as they want to share in many ways?
Yeah. So first of all, I absolutely agree with you, Mark. I think I am a true believer of the fact that vulnerability sits at the heart of effective leadership. And that is becoming not even just effective leadership, but impactful leadership, like people you want to follow, people you want to listen to and want to be led by. And it's go back sort of 10 years ago or so, that was like an unheard of theory, and it was very much against the grain. It's becoming much more prevalent now. It's something that people are talking about, that kind of vulnerability, emotional intelligence in leadership. But I am a believer in the fact that we can't talk about it enough, because I think it is that important. So yeah, it's definitely something we should go into. So in my experience, vulnerability, or my kind of experience of vulnerability as a conscious concept, if I'm honest, I think was probably born out of pure desperation. So I referenced earlier that I had postnatal depression off the back of having Max. But prior to that, if we go back even further, so if we go back to kind of 2019, I think it was 2019, I had 8 weeks or so off work, just due to burnout. I drilled myself into the ground, which had really exasperated my anxiety, and it had just gone from 0 to 100 across a couple of months. And I'd very much been sort of putting my head in the sand and not acknowledging what was happening. And everybody around me was like, this isn't good. You don't seem like yourself. What's happening? And I just was adamant that I was fine until I wasn't. And that culminated in, as I said, 8 weeks off work, signed off officially by a doctor, sick leave, all that kind of stuff. And that was my first real experience, I'd say, with mental health challenges and how to navigate that. And I think that really was the beginning, looking back, of me starting to acknowledge the importance of being vulnerable and how that can connect you with others. And it sounds like common sense, right? Of course, being vulnerable connects you with others. And if you're talking about what you're feeling and thinking openly and authentically, people are going to connect with that. But there is still to this day, like I said, not as much as say 10 years ago, but still to this day, definitely in a professional environment, there is a certain level of taboo or resistance or cautiousness around how much is too much, how much should you give in a professional environment, where is the line stepping over into that was really inappropriate, why did she say that? So it is a fine balance, which I have kind of worked over the last few years to try and master. And I think the reason I think it's so important is because I have seen a genuine impact around me, both from a team performance point of view, from my own performance. And I am naturally, as you probably know, Mark, now we've spoke a few times, like I am naturally a connector. At my core, I want to connect with everyone I meet with. And I think the best way to do that, in my experience, is to, if you are capable of doing so, be vulnerable, be open. I am the definition of wears a heart on a sleeve. Like, that is me. I say I have no filter. I do, and I have an awareness, and it's definitely grown over the years of what is appropriate and what's not. So I'm not exactly going to be coming in and sitting in a corner crying every day. I'm not that guy, but I am confident and comfortable enough to lead the charge when it comes to being open and honest and talking about challenges and talking about if I've had a tough day or if I'm struggling with a task or whatever that is. I think it's really important to acknowledge the power there is in somebody in a leadership role talking about those things very openly, because it sets the tone, whether it be with your direct team, whether it be the people around you. It really sets a tone that the expectation isn't to be all-knowing, perfect, always at 150% contributor, because none of us are that. And as a manager or as a leader, I think it is truly irresponsible if you are consciously or subconsciously giving that expectation out to the people around you. And also, though, if you are portraying that you for whatever reason, never really struggle, and you're setting this expectation with your team and the people around you that you know everything and you are this all-knowing source, then that then sets the expectation with them that to progress and to get to your position or your level or move forward in their own careers, that's the aim. They have to be in a position where they know everything and nothing phases them and they never have a bad day. And that is just, as we all know, not reality for anybody. So I think in a leadership role, you have a responsibility. And I use that word intentionally. I think it is a responsibility. I think when you are a leader, it's not, I don't think it should be a case of, oh, well, I get the importance of vulnerability, but it's not really how I work. It's not really what I do. I think it should be a non-negotiable. I think you absolutely, to be an effective leader, have to have a certain level of emotional intelligence. And I think alongside emotional intelligence comes the ability to be vulnerable in a way that's impactful. And just to clarify, and I think this is worth mentioning, when I talk about vulnerability, I'm talking about you sharing a part of yourself that enables somebody else to see themselves reflected back. I'm not talking about oversharing or using somebody else as a sounding board or getting something off your own chest. I think if you're getting relief from being vulnerable, then you're not doing it in the right way. Vulnerability should be at service of the person sat in front of you when I'm talking about it from a professional standpoint. So when you're being vulnerable in a professional setting from the position of a leader, it should be to allow somebody else to see themselves reflected back in your honesty, rather than you venting or ranting.
Using it as a weapon or something like that, in your discussion.
At the root of it, it should always be at service of the person sat in front of you, not you needing to get something off your own chest. So my point there is, it's not, even though vulnerability absolutely should be authentic and real and driven with the right motivations, it also can be a bit of a skill to a certain extent to kind of find that right balance and understand how to do it effectively and impactfully without oversharing and without making it about you, because it shouldn't be about you. Does that make sense?
Completely, because you can make the other person feel uncomfortable, like you could use it as a tool to further yourself rather than help them. So I think you need to be really conscious of how you're using that and how it's being portrayed within that group of people. I completely get that. I've managed teams for, I don't know, 12 years or so, teams up to 50, sales teams up to 12. And I like to think I've got quite a lot of emotional intelligence, but kind of even speaking to how you're speaking in terms of how proactive you are, with how conscious you are of your actions and what you do. I'm kind of sitting there going, I've got quite a lot to work on and do. But in terms of that leadership piece, I think from a sales perspective, the biggest billers become managers, or the people that do that biggest recruitment project become the recruitment team lead. And the way we're kind of framing management and how we're putting people in these positions is probably being judged wrong, and the metrics of success of managers is probably completely false in many ways. And I think probably the best billers aren't always the best managers, and there's probably other people in the team that are more capable for that. A lot of people that put into management are just left into management. There's no training, there's no support, there's no further engagement. They know what they're doing now, they'll be fine. In terms of your experience with leadership within Softcat and in your own journey, like what's your experience been, and what have you learned kind of over the last 10 years about leadership?
Yeah, great question. So going back to your point there, I absolutely agree. I think that as an industry, historically, from both it's really difficult, right? When you have a very KPI metric driven industry like sales, recruitment, whatever it is, you obviously, and definitely it's a mistake, it's an age-old mistake, and it's a legacy problem. We look at who's performing in their roles, put 2 and 2 together and get 5 and go, that person can manage other people to do the same. And it's just not true. And how many times have we seen that go terribly wrong, where you promote people who are, like you said, your top biller or your highest performing recruiter, but their emotional intelligence is 0. And therefore the people coming up underneath them are not getting the support and the development they need. Therefore, it just impacts the whole ecosystem. So I think, going back to your question, my experience has been that from day one, I knew, as I said, prior to Softcat, I'd done some management. It was never to the extent I'm doing it now, and it definitely wasn't what you'd class as leadership. But I had experience of managing people on a day-to-day basis. So I knew it was something I enjoyed. I knew it was something that I had the basic skill set for. I've always been, as you can probably imagine, that kind of bossy kid in school, that one that had her hand up at the front of the class all the time. That was me. I was the irritating girl in the class. So I always knew I had the skill set to kind of manage a group of people, lead a group of people, be that facilitator and bring people together in that way. And I'd always been driven by connection as well. So all of those things led me to believe that management leadership was something that not only I would be good at, but I also would enjoy and feel quite passionate about. But I think that's like the base level. Having the skill set, yes, of course, it has to be there and it has to be a passion for people. But you cannot, and I think we do sometimes in lots of organizations, negate the importance of training and negate the importance of developing somebody's ability to manage people effectively. And there is absolutely a vast difference between effective day-to-day management and leadership. And being able to drive a team forward, being able to understand what every individual needs and wants from you and work proactively with them to develop them and make sure that moving forward, we are, as an organization, pipelining for our future leadership teams and our future, the next generation of management. And the only way you can do that is if you are upskilled yourself to be able to manage in that way and not just focus on the day-to-day and get caught up in the weeds, which a lot of managers do, especially in the first couple of years of their managerial career. So something that we have at Softcat that's had a humongous impact on me in the last 2 years specifically is we have leadership development programs. I referenced it earlier. So we have a leadership foundation program, we have a leadership development program, and they are on the upper end of our managerial training. We have lots of other levels of training within our managerial upskilling system. But when you get to kind of sort of senior team leader level, head of department level, those programs start to become available to you. You have to be selected to go on them. But I went on our leadership foundation program last year, about 6 months or so after returning from maternity leave, and I would attribute that to being one of, if not the key factor in my success within the managerial leadership element of my role over the last 2 years, because it completely revolutionized the way I view leadership, the way I view the impact we can have on our people, our ability to create high-performing teams and drive a team forward. It just built, I already thought I was an effective manager, and I think I was, but it elevated me to that next level in a way that I never anticipated. And I now have, similar to what you've just said there, you kind of sit there and go, I've managed teams, I've managed people, I absolutely know what I'm doing and I'm good at it. People tell me I'm good at it. But it just threw the rule book out the window for me. And they're run externally by a facilitator who comes in, and I think there was 6 modules, one a month across 6 months, and we'd all go, there was 10 of us, and we'd all be in a room together, and it'd be a day's worth of focus on a particular topic, whether it was developing a high-performing team, whether it was values and the importance of understanding the values of team members and all that kind of stuff. And it was just stuff that I'd never had exposure to, and it completely revolutionized the way that I approach management and I approach people generally. And I have said this a number of times since that program, and everybody laughs when I say it, but it totally changed the way I viewed life as well. We did a massive piece on growth mindset and the ability to reframe challenges and all that kind of stuff. And that for me was one of the most impactful pieces of the entire program, because it took me from a place where I've always been really confident, but behind the scenes, I did doubt myself quite a lot. And I wouldn't ever let it impact my ability to go and do something, but I had a relatively consistently flowing negative narrative internally around, and I didn't realize how prevalent that was until I started to check myself on it more and listen to it more. And the power of being able to reframe that narrative and start checking myself on the narrative I was feeding myself, and this story I was telling myself about, am I good enough? I say it going back to what you mentioned about CRN. I did the keynote for Softcat at CRN Women in Tech Fest at the end of last year, and that was all about vulnerability and leadership. And I opened that with the phrase, "I'm not as impressive as people think I am." And the reason I did that is because I realized off the back of doing the Leadership Foundation course that phrase specifically had been a relatively running title in my mind for a long time. I'm not as impressive as people think I am. I've got off on my personality for a long time. People have bought into me. That's why they like me so much. And I probably aren't as impressive behind the scenes as people assume I am. And there was this narrative of I'm not as impressive as people think I am. And being able to check myself on that, realize that, and then reframe all of that and come out the other end, I think has been the most impactful piece of the last 2 years for me. So going back to your original question, that was a bit of a tangent, but going back to your original question, I think the ability to upskill our managers in what the difference is between management and leadership, because there is a vast difference, I think is pivotal. And again, going back to one of the earlier topics, I think that fills a gap when it comes to supporting returners and ensuring that we are enabling a certain or assessing a certain level of emotional intelligence in our next generation of managers. And I think the expectation has to be different than it's been historically. It can't just be you're successful in your own role, therefore surely you can make other people replicate that success. It's just not true. There has to be other pivotal factors that we look for in successful people managers, namely a certain level of emotional intelligence and an ability to understand the impact that being vulnerable in the right way, in the right environments, can have on success of teams and individuals. So yeah, does that answer your question, Mark?
100%. What I really like about the leadership training stuff you mentioned is you get a lot of training where it makes you conscious of something you're doing and then sets a task for what to do moving forward. But a lot of the time that stuff can drift off over a period of time, but it actually feels like they built a framework around what you should be doing and how you should be thinking, which is really unique to a lot of the training you're getting. So yeah, sounds really, really good. And I really resonate with the message you're telling yourself compared to what you're seeing kind of externally. That's really, really good. Really keen to touch on kind of Softcat more as a business, because I don't think anyone in the channel can argue that the business has been at the forefront in terms of diversity, inclusion, and also that culture piece. Like, I started recruiting in 2016 within the IT channel, and I think I heard for 3 years, we want to build a Softcat culture like Softcat. That's all you'd ever hear. And they'll be like, how do we do it? And I'm like, I've got no idea. I've been in for 5 minutes. Like, what are they doing that's so good? And then we start working with you, and I saw it firsthand, and I was thinking, I don't know. I still don't really know. I still don't get it. Can you just touch on some key things that the business has done in that kind of 10-year journey that you've been there that have built that really diverse, inclusive environment? Because I don't think anyone's doing anything to the degree that you've done, from the interview process right through to when people get into the business. It's so unique.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think this whole piece has to be two-pronged. For it to be successful, you have to tackle it from two main angles. And I think they have to be, how are we diversifying our talent pools to the extent, or to the highest extent we possibly can? So looking at all elements of your recruitment process, from application through to offer, and looking at the real detail of how can we enable equity at every stage. So, I mean, there's a lot of kind of, we throw the word diversity around a lot nowadays, and equality is really important and diversity is really important. I think equity is really where we want to be within a recruitment process. So I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's an image where it's 3 people stood at the side of a baseball pitch, and there's a fence, and there's a man that can see over the fence already, and then there's a man who's a bit shorter. And essentially it's not about giving more opportunity to other people. It's about recognizing that certain demographics are undeniably at a disadvantage and leveling the playing field. So making sure that everybody has equal opportunity at every stage, and we're enabling everybody to access our process in the same way at every stage. So that's a really important piece to ensure that we are enabling ourselves to tap into the most diverse talent pools and demographics as possible at every stage of the recruitment process. So I could go into a huge amount of detail around that. Obviously, recruitment is my bag, so we could do an hour on that. But the basics of it are making sure you're using the right partners, making sure you're examining your processes at every stage and making them as accessible as possible. Making sure that if you do simple things, like if you cap a certain stage, for example, we have assessment centres in some of our early careers processes. If you cap assessment centres at a certain number, ensuring that you have equal representation amongst that number is really important to create as diverse of a group as possible and ensure that everybody feels represented and The representation piece is really important. So if you have stakeholders or internal interviewers being in assessment centres or on panels, make sure that there is equal representation and that the people who are there can see themselves reflected back in the people that they're meeting. That all sounds super, super basic at this stage, but that is, in my opinion, the foundations of creating an equitable process. So that is really, really important. But then you get to the offer stage, you've done everything you can to diversify your processes and make sure that everybody has as positive of an experience as possible. You then have to switch your mindset into, once people are through the door, how are we then backing up all of that action within the process with a true and authentic commitment to inclusion and belonging within the business? So it's all well and good putting all this effort in within the recruitment process to then get people through the door and have your D&I stats go up and be able to report back to your board or whatever that, yes, we've seen our diversity increase in our workforce over the last 12 months. But it's going to be one step back, two steps forward if you don't continue to back that up with the real hard work of creating an inclusive environment where belonging is very much the goal. So from a Softcat point of view, I mentioned to you earlier, but we have a diversity, inclusion and engagement specific team within our HR division. And they are absolutely incredible at what they do. And they manage a lot of the internal initiatives and also manage all of our communities alongside the leads for those communities. And we have people who put themselves forward to take a leadership role in all of our different communities. And we have a lot of investment internally from employees in this, wanting to create an inclusive environment. And we are very active from a community basis. So we have panel talks, we have guest speakers, we have obviously we have International Women's Week, where we do a real big push on women in business, and we have lots of initiatives around that. So it really is a very proactive approach to creating as inclusive of an environment as possible. But it goes back to my earlier point, Mark, around what I said about returners. It's about authentically and genuinely being committed to making people feel seen. So if it's a box to be ticked, people are going to see through that immediately, and it becomes very apparent very quick. If it's a genuine part of, as an organisation, your value system and what you want to work towards, people very quickly start to feel validated, feel seen, feel appreciated in the right way, and therefore it will build momentum and it will become what it has become here at Softcat, which is a truly embedded part of our organisation, part of our values, part of our vision for what this business is and should be moving forward. But if it's a box to be ticked, as I said, people see through that very quickly, and therefore you will not get the investment, you will not get the engagement, and it will not get up and off the ground. So yeah, does that answer your question?
100%. Yeah, exactly. I think there's some real good kind of nuggets there in terms of advice and guidance and what you're doing internally. And one thing I've noticed kind of externally is your assessment days. When I first went into recruitment in like 2016, 2017, we're working with Dixie, where like the hires you're making and the growth you're experiencing from sales were really strong. And I think it would have been so easy for you to rest on your laurels and kind of just carry on doing that. But it's changed like 3 or 4 times since then. So like, you've never just sat on saying, this has worked perfectly, let's carry on doing it. Like it's constantly progressive. Like there's nothing that's ever just sitting there and staying still anytime in Softcat.
I agree. And I think we absolutely, it's funny, I was having a conversation with one of the guys on my team the other day. We absolutely are committed to continuous improvement. So there is always within my team specifically, there is an eye on the ball at all times, and are we doing things in the most impactful and effective way? And there is a lack of fear around this. Is, I think, historically, going back sort of 5, 6, 7 years, maybe a bit more, as a business, I don't think I'm out of turn for saying this, definitely within recruitment, we were more of the thinking of, this is kind of how we've always done it, and therefore why would we change it? It's working. Whereas the influx of new managers over the last couple of years, myself taking this role, I think we're very much now much more in the way of thinking of, yes, it's working, but could it be more impactful? And there's a real continuous improvement mindset, a real kind of want and appetite to make our processes and our candidate experience and our stakeholder experience the most powerful and impactful it can be. And therefore that means always revisiting what we're doing and why. And I think that's the real important bit. Just always asking the why. Why are we doing it that way? Why has it always been done that way? Why couldn't it be more impactful? Because if you're not asking the questions, you're not getting the answers. And I think breeding a culture, and again, it links really closely back to psychological safety and that vulnerability piece and the importance of psychological safety in high performing teams. This is a really good example of that. You will not get your team members coming to you with suggestions for potential improvements if they don't feel it's a safe space to do so. And they're the types of environments where nothing ever changes because it's one person sat at the top going, this is how we've always done it. This is why I want to do it this way. And nobody's going to challenge it or have any other ideas because it's not a safe space to do so. Whereas if you are from day one proactively and intentionally working to breed a culture within your team or your department or your organization of that feels psychologically safe for everybody involved. And what I mean by that is every single person knows that good, bad or ugly, they can put an idea forward. And even if it's not correct, nothing's going to be, they're not going to be shot down. They're not going to be shamed. They're not going to be embarrassed. They're not going to be made to feel like they shouldn't have said what they said and they shouldn't have spoken up. And that is a really solid example of where psychological safety, either the presence of or the lack of, can impact a team's ability to perform and progress. So yeah.
Amazing. Last question. I appreciate we're running a little bit over. I think there's loads of companies out there that would love to replicate the success that Softcat have had in terms of that diversity inclusion piece. And obviously the culture piece goes without saying. I think a lot of them will say they're a £2.5 billion business. It's easy for them to have people in the business that can go and do that stuff and kind of have people that are purely focused on that. For smaller organisations that want to drive positive change into their business around kind of diversity inclusion, what's kind of snippets of advice or messages they could take away that could potentially help that? Because in reality, at one point, Softcat weren't 2.5 billion, we're still doing it. So it's always been a reality within the business.
The diversity and inclusion piece specifically.
Yeah.
So I think it's twofold. I think you have to have investment from the top. So as much as a lot of the engagement will come from your wider employee base, and the success of it depends really on the engagement of the wider employee population, because when we're talking about things like networks, communities, that kind of stuff, you have to have that engagement to get them up and off the ground and gain some real momentum. But the only way that people, or the majority of people, really check into an idea of something like that is when they know that it's truly backed and invested in right from the top. And if they're not feeling that investment and they're not feeling like it is, as I said earlier, an authentic and genuine want and willingness to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong, and if it feels in any way tokenistic, then people will disengage and people will check out of it. So it's about, if we're talking about a smaller, for example, a smaller reseller who wants to start looking at how do they start building out something like this, I think the place to start is, as a leadership team, as a senior leadership team, you need to ensure you're all on the same page with the message, and you need to ensure that everybody is bought in, invested, and understands the value in what we're trying to do here. Because if there is anybody who isn't, then it's probably going to be felt in the effort. So everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to want to drive forward in the same way from a leadership point of view, in my opinion. Once you've got that box ticked, for lack of a better word, I think it's then about engaging with the employee population and asking the question. And I think this is the answer to a lot of life's big questions, right? When people go, how do we do this? How do we do that? Ask the question. Ask the question as to what do you, as an employee group, what do you want? What is it that you feel you would get value out of? What's going to make you guys feel like this is more of an inclusive environment? And I think being directed and steered, for the most part, by the people who this is going to service with something like this is really the best way to approach it. And then once you've started to get those ideas and you've started to gather together a little bit of a base of where do we start and what are the first actions and what's going to be the quick wins and where are we going to have the most impact in a short space of time, then you can start building on that to a place where you can start putting together a diversity and inclusion strategy and have something that over the next 12 months you're going to work towards. And I think goals are really important. I think when people feel like there is a commitment to driving this forward and there is a commitment to seeing positive change, and in 12 months we want to be here and this is the goal, I think that creates engagement as well, and therefore builds momentum around an initiative or around something like diversity and inclusion within an organization. So yeah, I think investment from the top, and then going out to the wider employee group and asking, what do they want and what's going to have real impact for them, and then building on that to a place where you can then put together a broader, more long-term strategy with
Nice.
some end goals in place.